In the dopamine-driven world we live in, attention spans are falling and the people who read become increasingly more scarce. People either lost the interest for reading altogether, see it as a waste of time, or are unable to read a book because Netflix and TikTok are just way more engaging. Well, I'm here with the hope to change that, as I believe that reading next to using a computer properly is the ultimate meta skill. Before going into the topic of how you can achieve the goal of reading more, we first need to figure out the why, because reading has incredible benefits and in more areas than you can imagine.
The foundation of learning is reading. I don't know a smart person who doesn't read and read all the time.
This quote by Naval Ravikant will be the thesis of the whole video. I don't know if it's the only way to become smart, but it's definitely one way. Some short personal background on that: I read about 200 books over the last 4 to 5 years, and a very close friend to mine told me recently that there is no one who changed more than me since leaving school. I attribute a lot of that to reading a lot, which changed my worldview and had second-order effects in better judgment, decision-making, courage and confidence. And yeah, I know self-boasting totally sucks, but I honestly believe that I'm a lot smarter than I was 5 years ago. Now let's get into some of the benefits I felt myself and scientific research of reading in general. There is a fantastic video called How to Learn a Language, Input. It makes the point that learning a language is strongly dependent on the quantity of input. Well, what if the same is true for learning in general, for reasoning, judgment, assessing situations and living a better life overall? Wouldn't reading be one of the most worthwhile activities you can possibly perform? What reading a lot does is giving you more and more analogies and concepts that you can transfer to different contexts. More is simply better in that case. The more you read, the more dots you start to connect. Children who read are better able to grasp abstract concepts, apply logic in various scenarios, recognize cause and effect, and utilize good judgment. And this is mirrored by the actual neuron activity in your brain, by creating new neural connections and strengthening existing ones, leading to a heightened connectivity. Intense reading literally physically rewires your brain and creates more white matter by doing so. For example, reading activates the left temporal lobe and it remains more active on the day after reading and even the days after that compared to non-readers. It's responsible for sound and language processing as well as functions that are related to memory and even emotion management. That's why a study found that reading regularly decreases mental decline for the elderly by 32% and increases the capacity of the working memory. A study at the University of Sussex found that reading for only 6 minutes can reduce stress by up to 68%. That's better than listening to music, going out for a walk, or drinking a cup of hot tea. This is because your mind is invited into a literary world that is free from the stresses that plague your daily life. And being in a literary world has other benefits as well. It fosters imagination and creativity, because the visuals are happening in your head instead of being pre-produced on TV. And by putting yourself into different characters' shoes, maybe even morally grey characters, you learn to think outside of your existing point of view and can build empathy through that. Next to the temporal cortex, reading also activates our primary sensory motor activities through the central sulcus. In 2009, a brain imaging study in the US showed that reading about landscapes, sounds, smells and tastes activates brain areas tied to these experiences in real life, creating new neural pathways. Simply stated, our brains simulate real experiences, which doesn't happen when you're watching TV or playing computer games. Enough reasons to pick up a book and start reading? How about one more, the one I started the video with? Reading expands your attention span. Stories have a beginning, a middle and an end, a structure that encourages our brains to think in sequence to link cause, effect and significance. And a better than average attention span and being able to focus is kind of a superpower in the 21st century, as I explained in detail in my video on deep work. But how do you read more? Maybe you always wanted to read but then didn't really follow through. And we talk about two things here: the habit of reading and maybe even more importantly, how to read and what to read. These questions really need to be asked in tandem with each other. Here's why. The question, what should I read? Can you recommend books to me, is a frequent one. And it's a good one, but it shouldn't be a limiting one. Read whatever you find interesting. It really doesn't matter, especially at first. You want to get into the habit of reading. Don't start with the longest, most complicated works. Start with anything that captures your interest and engages you longer than a few minutes. When I started reading more, I read a lot of self-improvement books, and looking back, most of them were not really that good or insightful, but rather bloated. But they served me well in continuing to read, because they were easy to read. I got to more difficult and more impacting books later on. Quite automatically actually, because I just followed my curiosity. To give you one example, I picked up an overview of psychological biases and Nassim Taleb got quoted a handful of times. So I read his books next, and even created videos on them as they profoundly changed my worldview. I also don't restrict myself to a specific genre at all. I read biographies, self-help, psychology, economics, and game theory, classical fictional novels, or philosophy. But I also read books on design, on how to write better code, on startup culture, venture capital, the history of money, Bitcoin, and whatever else seems interesting. And all of this can be summarized in another quote by Naval Ravikant.
Read what you love until you love to read. What do I read? How do I read? Because for most people, it's a struggle, it's a chore. So the most important thing is just to learn how to educate yourself. And the way to educate yourself is to develop a love for reading. Everybody I know who reads a lot loves to read. And they love to read because they read books that they loved.
And I absolutely agree with that statement. Once you love to read, you naturally progress to the good works and foundational books. If you want to find out beforehand if a book is worthwhile, you can of course go based by reviews, or there's another great litmus test, and that is how long the book has been in print. This is Nassim Taleb's Salindi idea. The chances that a book that's in print for hundreds of years is better than a book released this year are very high. It survived the test of time. One of the best hacks to read more is to get rid of the self-imposed need to finish a book. Everyone knows the feeling of being stuck in a book, because it somehow doesn't capture your interest anymore. Sure, you can strengthen your willpower and work your way through it, but that's not really your goal here. Your goal is you want to learn how to love to read. So the solution is quite simple. Get rid of the book. Maybe finish it another time, maybe don't. Find another book that inspires you and lets you keep reading. And to get more into the habit of reading, I would suggest that you have a fixed time slot for it in your day. I always read first thing in the morning while drinking my coffee, and most of the time read again before going to bed. Although the latter seems to be much harder for me, because I just fall asleep. You could also read in the metro on your way to work, or while having lunch, or right after work. The time and place really doesn't matter. On what medium you read doesn't matter either. I frequently switch between paper books to Kindle to iPad and back to paper again. In case you really start loving a book, you will pick it up during different times of the day anyway and ditch Netflix or video games for it. To summarize, books can serve very different purposes. They can be an exit from the world you live in, teach you about the world you live in and the great people who created it. They can inspire you to take action in your life and improve your mental capabilities. I challenge you to start reading and stick to it. If you follow through, you might report incredible benefits in a few months or years. Once you find the right books for you and realize that a $10 purchase of a book can be life-changing, it's game on. Thank you for watching.